I drove my own son to his wedding rehearsal dinner in my old Chevy pickup because the car I bought him for graduating law school was parked in his younger brother's driveway with a set of keys I had never authorized anyone to copy. It had been there for 11 days. My son Elliot is 31 years old. He graduated from Wayne State University Law School 3 years ago. I bought him a 2021 Acura TLX dark gray, loaded because I had promised him when he was 14 years old, sitting in the back of that same Chevy during a snowstorm on I-75, that if he ever became a lawyer, I would buy him a car worth driving to court. I kept that promise. I wrote the check myself. The title was in his name. 11 days before his wedding, he called me from a parking lot in Dearborn. "Dad, I need a ride to work. What happened to the Acura?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom gave Nathan the keys." I did not say anything right away. I pulled into a gas station off Van Dyke and sat there with the engine running. "How long?" "About 2 weeks," he said. I didn't want to make it a thing before the wedding. I told him I would pick him up. I drove the 40 minutes to his apartment in Ferndale. He was standing on the curb in his work clothes with a coffee thermos and the kind of face a man makes when he has decided to absorb something rather than fight it. I had seen that face on him since he was a child. It was not a weak face. It was a patient one. I did not fully understand what that patience had cost him until much later. His mother is my ex-wife, Sandra. We divorced when Elliot was 16 and his younger brother, Nathan, was 12. The divorce was not clean. It was not ugly in the screaming way people imagine. It was ugly in the quiet way. The way a house slowly fills with water from a leak nobody wants to admit is there. By the time we separated, there was not much left to divide except the children, and Sandra had long since decided what she thought each of them was worth. Elliot was her difficult one. That was the word she used. Difficult. What she meant was that he questioned her. He noticed things. He kept receipts, metaphorically and sometimes literally. Nathan was her easy one, her sweet one, the one who never pushed back. He was 27 now. He worked inconsistently doing contractor work. He had a girlfriend who was pleasant enough. He had never held a job longer than 14 months. He drove the Acura to a gym in Uvonia 3 times a week and had not, to my knowledge, said a word to his brother about the situation. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Royal Oak. Elliot's fiancée was a woman named June, 30 years old, a pediatric occupational therapist from Grosse Pointe. I liked her enormously. She was warm and direct, and she looked at my son the way people look at things they have decided to keep. Her parents were good people from Ohio. Her father, a retired high school principal, shook my hand at the bar and told me Elliot was one of the finest young men he had ever met. I told him I agreed and meant it. Sandra arrived in a dress that was designed to be noticed. She sat at the far end of the table and talked about Nathan for 20 minutes. His new truck, his plans to start his own contracting business. The business had been in the planning stage for approximately 3 years. I watched Elliot. He was talking to June's mother. He was laughing. He was performing normalcy in the way he had learned to perform it around Sandra since he was a teenager. He was good at it. That had always made me sad. After dessert, I found him at the bar. I said, "Tell me what happened with the Acura, the real version." He looked at his drink. Then he told me Sandra called him 6 weeks earlier. Nathan needed a reliable car because he was starting his business and his truck had transmission problems. Could Elliot let Nathan borrow the Acura for a few weeks, just until Nathan got the business off the ground and could afford something of his own? Elliot had said he would think about it. 2 days later, Sandra had driven to his apartment complex while he was at work, found the Acura in the parking structure, and used a spare key she had apparently kept from the original purchase, which had gone through her address, to take the car. She had not called first. She had not left a note. She had texted him 4 hours later. I figured you'd say yes anyway. Nathan really needs this. You understand. He had not responded to the text. I stood at that bar for a moment. Then I set down my glass. "Elliot, I want you to let me handle something." He looked at me. He had his mother's cheekbones in my eyes and an expression that was entirely his own. "Dad, the wedding is in 6 days. I don't want to blow up." "There won't be a blow up," I said. "I just need you to trust me for a little while longer." He studied me. "How long is a little while?" I had been waiting 11 years for this conversation. A little while longer, I said. Was nothing, he nodded slowly. He went back to his fiancée. I went home to my house in Saint Sena. Claire Shores and I sat in my kitchen for a long time, drinking decaf. I did not taste, and I thought about a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk that I had been adding to for nearly a decade. My name is Theodore Marsh. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrician and then as the owner of a small electrical contracting business in Macomb County, Michigan. I sold the business 4 years ago when my niece told me I was done climbing ladders. I live alone in the house I bought in 1991. I have 2 sons and 1 ex-wife and a very good accountant named Phil, who has been trying to get me to retire fully for the past 2 years. I am not the kind of man who talks about feelings easily. I am the kind of man who builds things, fixes things, documents things, and waits. I learned patience from my own father, who was a tool and die man in a Ford plant for 38 years, and who told me once that most problems solve themselves if you give them enough rope, and most people hang themselves with that rope if you are quiet long enough. My father was right, but there is a difference between patience and paralysis, and I came close to that line more times than I would like to admit. Here is what I knew and when I knew it. When Elliot was 20 years old and a sophomore at Wayne State, he called me to say he had been denied for a student credit card. He had no credit history, which would have been normal, except that when he pulled his credit report, there were 2 accounts already there. A Visa card opened in his name in 2013, when he was 16. A personal loan from a credit union in 2015, when he was 18. Both showed late payments and partial collections activity. He had never opened either account. I drove to his apartment, we sat at his kitchen table, and went through the paperwork together. The visa had been opened at an address in Warren that I recognized as Sandra's sister's house. The loan application listed Sandra's phone number as the emergency contact. The signature on both documents was not Elliot's handwriting. It looked like someone had practiced his handwriting imperfectly. Elliot wanted to call the police that night. I told him to wait. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. I told him I needed a week. 1 week, and then he could do whatever he decided was right. In that week, I made some calls. I had a friend from my union days, a man named Douglas, who had retired from the Macomb County Sheriff's Department. He helped me understand the scope of what we might be looking at. I hired, on Douglas's recommendation, a private investigator named Sheila out of Clinton Township, who had spent 15 years doing financial fraud work before going independent, which Sheila found over the following 8 months was not a mistake. It was not opportunism. It was deliberate and sustained. The Visa card opened in 2013 had been maxed at $6,400 and charged off. The credit union loan in 2015 was for $14,000, ostensibly for home improvements, with a balance still partially outstanding because Sandra had made minimum payments for 3 years to keep it off collections radar. There was a second credit union account opened in 2017, a year before Elliot turned 21, for $9,500. There was a department store card from 2016 with $2,800 in charges. There was a medical bill in collections from a procedure Sandra had received in 2018 that had been billed under Elliot's insurance because his employer policy at the time had better coverage than hers. Total, by the time Elliot was 23, approximately $41,000 in fraudulent accounts and billings under his name. And there was something else. Sheila found it in the tax records, which she accessed through a contact she had at a firm that did forensic accounting. Sandra had claimed Elliot as a dependent on her federal tax returns for 4 years after the divorce, despite the fact that Elliot had been living with me full-time from the age of 16 and I was the one claiming him legally. She had used his Social Security number to collect the child tax credit and the earned income credit in years he was not entitled to either. The IRS overpayments totaled roughly $18,000 across those 4 years. When I saw that number, I sat in Sheila's office in Clinton Township and I was quiet for a long time. Sheila said, "Theodore, this is a prosecutable case. The question is timing and what your son wants." I said, "He doesn't know the full extent yet." She said, "When will you tell him?" I said, "When he is in a position to survive whatever happens after." She looked at me across her desk with the expression of a woman who had seen many families come apart over money. She said, "That's not a short timeline." "No," I said, "it is not. I continue to document for 3 more years." Every time Sandra opened a new account in Elliot's name, Sheila flagged it. I did not intervene. I let the documentation grow. I let Elliot believe I was working on it quietly, which I was, and I let Sandra believe no one was watching, which was the most important part. By the time Elliot graduated law school, the total damages under his name were $63,000 in fraudulent debt, plus the $18,000 in IRS fraud. $81,000 taken from a young man across a decade by his own mother, while she told everyone at family holidays what a cold and distant son he had become. The money had gone, according to Sheila's analysis, into a combination of Nathan's expenses, Sandra's credit card lifestyle, a 2-week trip to Portugal with a man she had been seeing, and a used boat that had been sold 3 years later at a loss. When Elliot was 25 and had his first real job at a small litigation firm in downtown Detroit, I sat down with him and told him everything. Not all of it. Enough. I showed him the first folder, the one with the fraudulent accounts. I washed his face. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that was very level, "How long have you known?" 7 years, I said. He looked at the table. "Why didn't you tell me when I was 20? "Because when you were 20, he said slowly, repeating back my own reasoning in real time, "you would have gone straight to her, and she would have cried. And you would have backed down, or she would have turned it around on you somehow, and the case would have evaporated." He was a lawyer now. He understood evidence chains. He understood why you do not move until you have everything. He was still angry. He had every right to be. "There is a second folder," I told him. He looked up. I had not shown him the second folder yet. It was not about the fraud. It was older and harder, and I had been building up to it for 7 years. But I needed to tell him now, before the wedding, before everything became public, because he deserved to know the full picture of what we were dealing with. The second folder began with a phone call I had received from Sandra's mother, a woman named Eunice, 3 months before Sandra and I filed for divorce. Eunice was 70 at the time, and she was not a complicated woman. She was a kind of grandmother who kept hard candy in a dish and forgot nothing and forgave nothing and loved her grandchildren with the practical intensity of someone who knows that children need at least one adult in their life who will not flinch. Eunice had called me at my office on a Tuesday afternoon in November 2013. She had asked me if I had a few minutes. I said yes. She said she needed to tell me something about Elliot, and that she was telling me something about Elliot, and that she was telling me because she had decided I was the parent who would handle it correctly. She told me that the previous summer, she had found some papers in Sandra's home office while she was looking for a pen. The papers were from a genetic testing service. DNA results. Comparison between a sample labeled S, Marsh, which was Sandra, and a sample labeled E, 14 years old, male, which was Elliot. Eunice had been a medical records clerk for 22 years. She knew what she was reading. The probability that Sandra Marsh was Elliot's biological mother was listed at 49.3%. Eunice had held onto the paper for 4 months before she called me. She said she needed time to understand what it meant before she said it out loud to anyone. I sat in my office after that call. I sat there for a while. Sandra and I had been together since we were 24. Elliot was born when Sandra was 26. I had never had any reason to question the circumstances. We had been, as far as I knew, a normal young couple having a child. But Sandra had a sister, Renee, who was 1 year younger and who had lived with us for 8 months during the year before Elliot was born. Renee had left abruptly in March of that year, shortly before Sandra announced her pregnancy. I'd always understood this as a sister conflict over household space. Sandra had told me Renee was difficult to live with. I had believed her because there was no particular reason not to. Eunice told me on that November call that Renee had had a breakdown in the summer of 2013. That during that breakdown, Renee had told her mother certain things, and that some of those things involved a child Renee had carried and delivered in the spring of 1993 in a private arrangement that Eunice had not known about at the time. I hired a second genetic testing service, opting to sample from Renee, who cooperated without my telling her why. The match probability between Renee's sample and Elliot's, run through a lab in Ann Arbor, came back at 99.94%. Elliot's biological mother was his aunt. Sandra had raised Renee's child as her own. Whether this had been a formal arrangement between sisters or something more coercive, I did not fully know. What I knew was that Elliot had never been told. Renee had never been told I knew. Sandra had known since at least 2013 that a DNA comparison existed, which meant she had gotten curious or worried at some point and had confirmed what she may have always known. And she had said nothing. To anyone. I had told Eunice that I needed time. Eunice had said she would not say anything further, but she had made it clear that she would not lie if Elliot ever asked her directly. She died in 2018 at 75. She left Elliot her good watch and a handwritten card that said, "You are the best thing that family ever made." He still has the watch. He wore it to his wedding rehearsal dinner the night we had this conversation. When I finished telling him, the room was very quiet. His apartment in Ferndale had one of those old kitchen faucets that drips. I could hear it across the room. He said, "Renee." Yes. He had seen Renee at holidays his whole life. She was the aunt who brought him books, who asked him real questions instead of small talk questions, who had cried at his law school graduation in a way Sandra had not. He had always liked her. He had always felt in some way he could never name, more comfortable with her than with his mother. "Does she know I know?" he said. "No," I said. "No," I said. "She knows what she is to you. She does not know that you know." He looked at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I started to worry. Then he said, "Dad, how many folders are there?" "3," I said. He exhaled. "Okay. Show me the last one." The third folder was the plan. I had spent 6 months consulting with a financial fraud attorney named Victor Hale, who practiced in Troy and who had been recommended by Douglas. Victor is 58 years old, methodical, and entirely without sentimentality, which is the correct personality for this kind of work. He had reviewed everything Sheila had documented and had put together a sequence of steps: legal filings, a referral to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, a civil complaint, and a recommendation regarding Renee. Victor's position on Renee was that she deserved to know what I knew, that she had a right to a relationship with her son if he chose it, and that nothing about the legal proceedings required her to be caught in the crossfire. He recommended I contact her separately, before the legal actions became public, and give her the choice of how she wanted to proceed. I had not yet done that. I had been waiting for Elliot. He looked at the third folder for a long time. Then he looked at me. He said, "You've been carrying this for 11 years. I said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you leave it alone?" "Some of it, the financial stuff, okay. But the other thing, you could have just let it be." I said, "Because last year, when your mother took your car, she did it the same way she has been doing things your whole life. In front of everyone, with a smile, knowing no one would challenge her. That car was the 10th thing she has taken from you. I did not want it to be the 11th. He was quiet again. I said, "Elliot, I have watched you absorb things since you were 8 years old. You are the most patient person I have ever known, and I am not sure I ever told you that patience was something I saw in you or that I admired it. I should have said that earlier." He did not say anything. He looked at the faucet dripping. After a while, he said, "I'm in." "After the wedding," I said. "After the wedding." He got married on a Saturday in October. June wore her grandmother's earrings. Elliot wore Eunice's watch. I danced exactly once with June's mother, and I did not fall down, which I considered a personal victory. Sandra sat at the family table. She smiled the whole evening. She gave a toast that was mostly about herself and Nathan. She looked very comfortable. That was the last time she looked comfortable for a long time. The legal process began the Monday after the honeymoon. Victor filed a civil complaint first, naming Sandra as the defendant in an identity theft and fraud action spanning 2013 to 2022. The same morning, he submitted a referral packet to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division detailing the 4 years of fraudulent dependent claims and the Social Security number misuse. He simultaneously contacted the Financial Crimes Division at Macomb County with Sheila's full documentation package. An investigator named Frank, a quiet man in his 50s who wore sensible shoes and took notes in a small notebook, opened an active case within 2 weeks. He did not contact Sandra immediately. He began subpoenaing bank records. The forensic accountant Victor brought in, a woman named Patricia from Birmingham, produced a 240-page report over the following 3 months. Every account, every transaction, every misfiled return, cross-referenced against Sandra's own financial records and the dates and amounts Sheila had already documented. In parallel, I went to see Renee. She lived in a small house in Roseville. I had called ahead. She opened the door and looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "Theodore, I've been expecting this call for about 15 years. Come in." We sat in her kitchen, and I told her what I knew and how I knew it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she put both hands flat on the table, the way my own father used to sit when he was thinking something through. She said, "Does he hate me?" I said, "He wants to meet you. That is not a man who hates." She started crying then, not dramatically, just steadily, the way people cry when they have been holding something for a very long time and they suddenly don't have to anymore. She asked me one question 3 times in different ways. Is he okay? Is he happy? Did he have a good life? I told her the truth each time. Yes, you said he but good life. I told her the truth each time. Yes, he did. We set up a meeting between Renee and Elliot for the following month, at Victor's office, with a counselor present at Elliot's request. I was not in that room. I waited in the hallway. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Elliot came out, he looked the way people look after something large is shifted, not broken, just changed position. He said, "She knew about me. She always knew. She used to send me things to Mom when I was little. The books, all those books." I said, "I know." He said, "She never stopped being my mother. She just wasn't allowed to be my mother." I did not know what to say to that, so I put my hand on his shoulder and I left it there. Nathan had been kept out of the entire proceeding. He had not known about the financial fraud. He had benefited from money that had been stolen, but there was no evidence he had known its source. Victor's assessment was that Nathan was collateral, not co-conspirator, and that treating him as a co-conspirator would only harden Sanders' defenses. But Nathan needed to be told before the arrest. That fell to me. I drove to his place on a Tuesday evening. I sat across from him in his living room with a coffee I did not drink, and I told him, as plainly as I could, what his mother had done to his brother over the past decade. I did not editorialize. I showed him the summary sheet Victor had prepared, 1 page, the dates and amounts and account types. Nathan did not speak for about 4 minutes. Then he said, "She told me you bought Elliot that car, but that Elliot said Nathan could use it until he got his truck fixed." I said, "Elliot said no such thing. He looked at the paper. He set it down. He said, 'I'm going to give him back the car and I'm going to apologize, and I don't expect him to forgive me, and I understand if he doesn't.' He did both of those things the next morning. He drove the Acura to Elliot's apartment at 7 a.m. and sat in the parking lot until Elliot came out. They stood in the cold for about 15 minutes. I don't know what was said. Elliot told me later that Nathan had cried and that he, Elliot, had not, because he had already done his crying. Sandra was arrested on a Thursday in February. Elliot called me from his car. He had just come from the courthouse, and his voice was steady, and he said, "Dad, it happened." I sat down in my kitchen. He said, "She looks small. I didn't expect that. She looked like someone who would run out of things to smile about." I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "I don't know yet. I'll tell you Sunday." He came for dinner that Sunday. June brought a pie. I made pot roast. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had shown him the first folder 2 years earlier, and we talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with any of it: football, his caseload, a vacation June wanted to take to Colorado, the leak in my gutters that I kept not fixing. At the end of the evening, when June was in the bathroom and it was just the two of us, he said, "Dad." "Yeah, you waited until I was in a position to survive it." I said, "That was the plan." He said, "The car." "That was the plan." He said, "The car. That was the thing that broke the dam."
Yes, he was quiet.
Then he said, "I knew you were working on something. I could always tell. I just didn't know how long it had been or how much." I said, "I should have told you more along the way." He shook his head. He said, "You told me exactly when I needed to know. That's what fathers do." I had to look out the window for a moment. The legal proceedings resolved over the following 10 months. Sandra accepted a plea agreement in December. 14 months in the county correctional facility. 3 years of probation. Mandatory restitution of $63,000 in damages plus $18,000 into IRS. Total of $81,000 to be paid from her assets, which included the equity from the house she had received in the divorce settlement and a retirement account she had accumulated over 20 years of office work. She came out of the settlement with significantly less than she had entered it. Her credit was restricted. Her professional licenses were reviewed. She was prohibited from serving as a financial signatory on any account not her own for the duration of her probation. Elliot's credit report was formally disputed and restored. Through a process, Victor walked him through account by account. By the following spring, his FICO score was 794. He is 32 now. He made Junior partner at his firm last year. He and June bought a house in Birmingham. There is a nursery in that house with a yellow wall and a bookshelf that June painted and that still smells faintly of the good paint. Renee helped him pick out one Saturday last October. Renee comes to Sunday dinners sometimes. She and Elliot are building something slowly. It does not have a name yet. It does not need one. Nathan is doing better. He finally started the contracting business for real. He has 2 employees. He calls me on Sundays. He is not the same person he was, which I mean as a compliment. I still live in the house in St. Clair Shores. I still drive the Chevy. Phil, the accountant, has mostly given up on getting me to retire. Elliot came over last month to help me fix the gutters. We were up on a ladder in the November cold, and he handed me a fastener and he said, "Dad, did you ever think about just letting it go?" I said, "Every single year." He said, "What kept you going?" I said, "You did. You kept going, so I kept going." He considered that for a moment. Then he handed me another fastener. We finished the gutters. We went inside. I made coffee. He called June and said he'd be home in an hour. I sat at that kitchen table after he left, and I thought about Eunice, who had made one phone call 11 years ago and set something in motion that she never got to see finish. I thought about Renee, who had sent books to a child she was not allowed to claim. I thought about my father, who told me to give people enough rope. I thought about that chirping faucet in Elliot's old apartment and how he had sat there looking at it while he absorbed the biggest facts of his life with the same steadiness he had been practicing since he was 8 years old. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to see what was taken from them. I was not going to let my son be one of those people. If you have ever been the child who did not make sense to your parent, the one who was called difficult for noticing what you were not supposed to notice, drop a word in the comments. Just one. Tell me what they called you when they thought you were the problem. I read every one. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who has been carrying something quiet for a long time. And subscribe. I will see you in the next one. I have thought a lot about what patience actually costs a person. Not the patience you perform for other people, the kind where you nod and say you're fine and change the subject. I mean the kind that lives in your chest for 11 years, the kind that wakes you up at 2 in the morning and asks you whether you are doing the right thing or just doing the easy thing dressed up as the right thing. There were years I was not sure which one I was doing. What I know now, sitting on the other side of it, is that what Sandra did to Elliot was not an accident, and it was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a pattern. It was 100 small decisions made over a decade, each one individually deniable, collectively devastating. The credit cards, the tax filings, the borrowed car she did not ask permission to take, each thing, standing alone, could be explained away. Together, they were a portrait of a woman who had decided, somewhere along the way, that one of her children was a resource and the other was a priority. What I also know is that the consequences she eventually faced were not the result of fate or luck or the universe deciding to balance some cosmic ledger. They were the result of work. Sheila's work. Victor's work. Eunice picking up the phone in November 2013 because she had a conscience and did not want to die with a secret that belonged to someone else. Elliot sitting at his kitchen table at 25 years old looking at a folder and saying, "Show me the rest." People sometimes want to believe that wrongdoing catches up with people on its own. I do not believe that. I have watched too many people absorb too much for too long with no resolution at all. What I believe is that consequences require someone to build them. Someone has to document the thing, retain the attorney, make the uncomfortable phone call, wait through the years when doing nothing feels unbearable and acting too soon would ruin everything. I was not a perfect father. I made choices during those 11 years that I would make differently now. I waited too long to tell Elliot some things. I told myself I was protecting him when sometimes I was also protecting myself from watching his face when the truth landed. Those are not the same thing, and I have had to be honest with myself about the difference. But I kept the folders. I kept adding to them. Every year, when Sandra took something else and smiled about it, I wrote it down and put it in the drawer. And I thought about my son, who kept showing up, kept working, kept building a life with the stubborn, quiet integrity of someone who refused to become what had been done to him. That is the thing I want people to take from this. Not that patience always wins, not that the system always works, but that character is built in the years when nothing visible is happening. Elliot became the man he became because he chose over and over not to let what was stolen from him define what he was capable of giving. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. I am 63 years old and I have fixed a lot of broken circuits in my life. The principle is always the same. You find where the current stopped flowing. You trace it back to the source. You do not guess. You do not rush. You document and you fix it right, and you do not cut corners because corners cut in electrical work burn houses down. Some things are worth doing slowly so they hold.